So, Odanga, if you were to describe what you do to your parents or to an older, let's even say retired person in your life, how would you explain what it is you do every day?
Well, when it comes to depot dev, what I think I'd say is my job is to sell information. And that information might not necessarily be so easy for people to get from time to time. And so there's a group of people that are actually very willing to pay for said information. And I'm the one who goes out, looks for it, and shares it with them. With regard to my most recent work, when it comes to Mozilla, I think is where it gets very complicated. Because I remember there was a time, the day I got verified on Twitter, I went to my dad and told him, yeah, I got this blue badge on this platform. He was like, how many cows is that going to bring me? So it's a very hard...
Wow.
It's a very hard thing to try and describe to your parents what exactly... the exact thing that I do. If I was to make it a bit simpler, how would I put it? That my job is to complain about the bad things I see on the internet and hope that I can call the customer care of the internet and they'll be able to fix it. I can say it that way.
I like that.
I think that's the best way to say it because we all go through issues with Safaricom or with Safaricom or
Kenya
Airtel,
Power,
Kenya
just
Power.
utility companies.
Exactly. But now my job is to try and write about it in a bigger sense and try to understand, because social media in general has come to be this thing that is literally redefining how we think about our communities, and our society in general. So my job is, to be a journalist that tries to hold a lot of these companies accountable. It's not just about finding a piece of false information. It's about who's responsible for all of this. That's where a lot of the work comes in. So, yeah, my job is to pick up the phone and ask people, so what's going on? Why is all of this weird stuff happening? And they surprisingly will tell you a lot of very interesting things about why those things are happening.
I like that, and that segues really nicely. So before you, well, maybe not according to your dad with the cows, rich and famous, but in my view, famous. We we co-wrote a trend report, with Nendo in 2015. And back then we were speculating on the influencer marketing industry, right? So part of what we said at the time is, okay, people are getting paid 30,000 shillings to per tweet, right? And then it was like, okay, this influence bubble will burst unless this and that and this is true. Now you've done a lot more investigative work, pretty important and informing work under the Mozilla Fellowship you're on. And what I'm curious is, one, help people understand a bit of what you uncovered, but the part I'm most interested in is you interviewed some of the people we talked about way back when, who, like I've said, the way that the story goes is 2015, we write this trend report, it's 30,000 a day for some people. Fast forward to 2018, late 2017, late 2018, people are being paid, and you can confirm this, a shilling per tweet. So 30,000 to a shilling, a lot of erosion of value. Obviously, there's a lot more to that story, but this is just an analogy. But if you can tell me now, you're standing face to face with somebody taking 2,000 shillings, and generally is a free agent, right? What we call thumbs for hire. Explain a bit of what they consider their job, and then we'll talk about information pollution as well. But who are these people? And I imagine that, hardworking everyday Kenyans, but there's probably a little more to say about it than that.
Yeah, I think going back to 2015, I think one of the interesting things we did at that time when we were writing, I feel like, I don't know, maybe if I can do this, but I don't know if you've watched the Untold Stories of Hip Hop.
No, yes, I've seen a bit of it, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like you're the Angie Martinez or, like you've worked with like people underground for a long time. So they pop up and, you're like, yeah, worked with this guy way back and we wrote like this 15-page juggernaut anyway. So I think at that point, one of the things we did was just create some very big speculations as to where the internet was going, and influencers was one of them. At that point, we looked at it from the brand side, but did not necessarily realize that there was this huge amount of upheaval that was actually going to be caused by the influence that politics was going to have on that entire sector. So, as you've said, rightly said, back then it was we highlighted how people were being paid 30,000 per tweet, and it seemed to have been this very lucrative business. Now, something that's very interesting about that is that, the terms for hire business has become such a like it's become such an industry that it has success cases. Right, so you've got these success stories of people who get into this job and are able to buy cars for themselves. Some people are even like, this guy even went and got married, and and it all stems from stories of back then. We are aware and we all know politicians, or other people within the political arena, especially this era that we're going into right now.
In 2022.
In 2022 is where we are seeing the first, digitally native politicians running for office. We know their names, we know who they are. They're no longer saying that, look, I'm here to get a position in government. Me actually want an elected seat off of the back of my internet fame. That's actually a very huge tipping point. And the next election is going to be even weirder. I think it's going to look a lot like what we've seen in other countries, where you have an extremely young candidate who's developed this an incredible amount of fame through the use of social media, and then, or through one way or the other, and then ends up in elective office. That's quite possibly what is likely to end up here. But at that time, we looked at what the trajectory was, and didn't realize the influence that politics was going to have on this whole thing. So you start off in around 2013, it's 2013, right? You have around 30,000 per tweet, and, there's this budding influence like sort of cohort that is building. And then at that time also, the digital market begins to mature, agencies begin to professionalize a lot more. The big advertising guys also begin to really strongly set up their business units for digital. And so the industry begins to attract a lot more talent. Now, what begins to happen is that there's an erosion of value, especially when it comes to the influencer side. And so what we begin to see is that whereas some guys may have started at 30,000 per tweet, the industry now morphs from direct contact with politicians, right, to the development of middlemen on the political side.
Right.
They begins to develop a sense of, a group of, a steady group of middlemen who are willing to offer these services to politicians, either out of their own pocket, right, or out of the pockets of the politicians themselves. When it's out of their own pocket, it's to gain political favor. When it's out of their own, if it's a favor, it's to gain political favor forward. And if it's out of their own pocket, it's still to make a buck while gaining political favor. And so around 2017 is when I think there began to be a really strong reckoning. And then the Cambridge Analytica scandal happens. But we never really get a sense of, the Kenyans that were running these things on the ground, what exactly was happening. It was becoming very notorious. Civil society was constantly being attacked. I, for one, actually, when I joined Mozilla, what got me on this story was that I'd speak to part of the work I do is to engage with civil society people.
Right.
I speak to a lot of them and they tell me, look, before we even go to the ground to do our own work, we had to overcome this additional challenge of trying to convince people to let us work with them, because politicians had essentially polluted the information space, and their messaging had gotten to the minds of the citizens that we're trying to help, that were telling us, look, these guys don't believe anything we say. They say we've been given money by George Soros to do so and so. And for us, I found that to be quite interesting. So when the BBI campaigns came around and these waves of fresh attacks came, that's now when I was able to begin looking into this story, and then managed to get a source that was able to, or rather multiple sources that were able to speak on the record about what their experience was like, why they do this, and how they do these things.
And would these be in just a way of saying, sort of the infantrymen, these are the folks who are in the WhatsApp group at the last mile with the 10 accounts, publicizing that and sharing that? Or is it somewhere in the middle, crafting the accounts, putting them into 10 different WhatsApp groups? Or is it at the top, basically giving the go or the no-go? Because I think it's actually down here that's the actual...
Yes.
That's where those are everyday folks, but here it's getting a bit more organized the higher up you go down up the chain.
Exactly. So it's getting a bit more organized the higher up you go the chain, but the people I was able to speak to, it's actually a mesh. So some of the guys who are at the bottom also organize their own thing because they're also trying to get up the ladder. Like as with any industry, you might be working with someone who maybe works for a big agency, but he's got his own agency on the side and all that kind of thing. People do the exact same kind of thing. It's like a literal, again, very well organized and well oiled industry. And so what you would find is that when I spoke to a lot of these people, it's that they were the foot soldiers, but the parties have machinery, that essentially is supposed to cater to this. If you open your Twitter homepage right now, you will be able to see that the first hashtag that's trending today is Ruto Maliza Ufungwe. Right? That is something that there's no way when the opposing political camp can deny any association with that. But, there have been ways that have been created that will make the paper trail, very convoluted. Because the main thing for me was trying to get to where exactly has this thing been commissioned from. Because there are many questions you also need to ask yourself. In the time that we did that study, the initial one that blew the lid on this whole influencer sort of, especially the political side, right? The political disinformation for higher industry in Kenya. Over a period of about 32 days, when we were collecting the data, we collected actually 62 hashtags. Yeah, so whereas the amount of money has become that much smaller, the volume
significantly more.
Exactly. So there's an economics of scale thing going on here. Guys are like, I can't pay you 30,000 per tweet. Now, my demands are different. I need consistent campaigns for a whole month, right? Attacking this and this type of person. Therefore, you guys have to bring your price down. And that's how we end up finding out that the cost, they are able to avail to me M-Pesa messages and that, alleged that they were being paid 15 to 20 USD per campaign.
Right.
Time.
So even just building on that, so we can sort of explain and cover this as groundwork. So explain, I guess, just sort of quickly, and I'll cue you. So because if this is true, then it it allows us to sort of move on to looking at the ecosystem. So in principle, there are for argument's sake, let's call them people who want a particular political view to be held and known, right? And then there are intermediaries. These are people who have, let's call it, dozens of WhatsApp groups, which each have hundreds of people inside them. And then sometimes, as you've said, those people in those WhatsApp groups can have their own WhatsApp groups. But in principle, it's like key message comes from there, mobilize in this way, and then basically execute and keep all your social media accounts ready to toe the line or to get something trending. And so, to me, I think, have you noticed, because this is again, something we predicted some time back, and again, this is all, in the public domain, that in the absence of the brand work, that's when the political work was coming in, and that's a gravy train that's only going to come once every, let's call it, four or 5 years, in that the brand seemingly cease to spend or don't spend as much, and then likewise, it's the reverse for politics. So for you, that infrastructure, how resilient would you say it is in that? Has it's been that way, it is that way, and does it cut across even on platforms like TikTok, where you've recently done some work, or it feels a bit different depending on the social network you look at?
So it's different based on the social network that we look at. Because one of the things these people categorically told me was that, look, this job would not exist if Twitter's trending feature did not exist. Period.
Right.
Period. Because there's no time in the world where all I needed was to, maybe with less than 100,000 shillings, manage to get the attention of close to 1.2 million people for a whole day. Because that's what Twitter's trending algorithm is. It serves as an on-ramp for many of the people who are using the application in terms of their user experience. Right?
Right.
So if I am able to manipulate that and make sure that my piece of content is number one, I will definitely get a lot of eyes looking at the message that I'm trying to put out. And secondly, if I think about it from the perspective of what is on the platform, there's no gatekeeper, and it's much cheaper and more effective than using a newspaper to try to push my message along. So I don't have to pay a journalist, I don't have to do a brown envelope journalism in order to get it past an editor and then eventually get it on print, because who reads print anymore? And secondly, it's much cheaper. Right? So now it's become a case whereby both parties within this election definitely feel that, look, I need to have, on top of having a mobilizer on the ground, right, that is able to bring people to come to my rallies, we also need someone there on the online space. That's what they'd call it. Hapo kwa mtandao, they need someone whose job is to whip up sentiment online, right? And these things, as Maria Ressa, I think, has aptly always said, it never stops online. When you see a lot of those things, they're actually part of a much bigger puzzle. They're always part of a much grander piece of political messaging that is actually going on. And many people don't realize that. It's not just happening as it is. And there are times where they do realize, and like I came to understand, like these tactics, like when dealing with the Pandora Papers, when we learned that these tactics get so nuanced, because we had like a guy who said he basically plays both sides, and when he's playing one side, he'll have names that have certain tribes, and when he's playing the other side, he'll have names that have certain tribes. Because
Clarify that's of his individual, like, let's say, online account.
Yeah.
That way he can sort of.
He splits.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this the same account where he's changing the last name?
No.
Okay.
He has a set of accounts.
This is what we call, I guess, like
two separate sets.
Meat puppets, right? So you have
sock puppets, yes.
Yeah, sock puppets.
But
right?
now the sock puppets have different
ethnical
backgrounds.
Right.
you know. So when he's dealing with this side, he deals. When he's dealing with this other side, he uses these names. And that's how crazy it is. And one of the things I also learned was like that line that is there today on the top of Kenya's trending hashtag, Ruto Malizo Fungwe. That is bound to rile up as many people as possible. So all they need to do, which is a common tactic, it's called viral sloganeering, okay, is that you look for a phrase that is so catchy and so emotionally inflaming that even if Twitter look at it, they're like, we can't deal with this hashtag because there are also a number of actual people who've gotten so pissed off at this thing, they're like, damn it, I have to comment on this thing. Yeah, so there's also those tactics that come in terms of how they actually get now the normal populace, right? Now where it's being perfected is, it's not just enough to have, a hashtag show up on the trending topic. How it gets sustained is when people begin to throw their hats into the ring, right, within that specific piece of content.
So interestingly, maybe on that, I think maybe one question I'd have is one of the working theories I have is that Twitter is among the most information polluted social networks, purely on the basis of the trending topics, but less so because of the thumbs for hire, pro hashtag, anti hashtag. Hashtag A, hashtag B, and generally that back and forth and the conversation that happens there. But instead, because of what I'd call, at least I'd like to believe this from those I've interacted with, well-meaning young digital marketers who we might call trend jackers, who are essentially equal opportunity offenders who take all 20 trending topics, regardless of any favoritism of any kind, and just squeeze those in as they try to sell their laptop, their sweaters, their keyboards, their clothing, whatever the wares they are. So essentially, it's a form of hawking online, but it pollutes the stream, and that you're looking, here's a legitimate trend, leave alone the political ones. Here's a legitimate trend, and I'm seeing that. I'm trying to learn more. So what do people have to actually say about this? When I get there, I'm met with the first 20 or 30 actual tweets or posts in this case that have nothing to do with the hashtag. And then you can clearly see they've got every hashtag under the sun. So maybe talk to me about how that is both helping or hurting. Because those people, I'd imagine, some of them are genuinely just looking for, hey, I want you to take a look at what I have to sell, but it comes at the cost of figuring out the info.
So the only thing about that is that it's spotty at best. So many a time, the actual political content, the charged one, will actually rise to the top because it's the one that will most likely get the engagement. And you also have to imagine that the users of the platform themselves have become immune, right, to that specific sort of interference. So they know when to scroll. If they see it, they'll just pick and go. They'll just keep moving, right? But that, to me, is a very small sliver of the definition of information pollution, because you have to consider what the githeri of what this pilaungerie of information pollution looks like, because on one end you've got those guys, right, but aren't you to imagine that you're a civil society activist who's been campaigning against police brutality, electricity, as many, energy justice, constitutional justice, as the guys of the BBI were doing, and every time or educational justice, okay? Every time you go onto the platform, anytime you post anything, or even as we've seen with people in Rwanda right now, activists in Rwanda, anytime you post anything about those specific topics, you cannot engage. A whole bunch of people come into your mentions and, send you threats, threaten your family, take pictures of you, put them on put them in weird situations. You wake up every morning, that kind of stuff. Now, the thing about this, where we've gotten right now, is, yes, a few years ago, I would say trend jackers were the problem. But when you look at, specifically for Twitter, we're talking about Twitter's dynamics, right? But when you look at Twitter right now, the information pollution is full of manufactured political opinion. That's where the big problem is. Right. That it's actually very hard to tell, right, who is actually on the payroll and who isn't, number one. And number two, information pollution from users themselves, right, who have very extreme political views. And, there's something that happens, Kenya's pollution environment in general Kenya's information environment in general becomes very polluted during elections. Even just the fact that it's very hard for other issues to permeate to the top of the stream, to the top of the information stream, means that the pollution environment is polluted. There's a monoculture of the information environment right now that is only geared towards the elections. And that tends to make it very impossible for what would be a healthy information ecosystem, which requires diversity, to thrive. And that's what's happening on the platform. There's something I once told people recently. Why is it that celebrities don't use Twitter?
Even global ones.
Yeah, even the global ones.
I think Elon Musk asked the same question. Yeah, exactly. So what's your working theory of that?
No. It's purely for the same reason. It's not because of the trend jackers. Right? They don't have a problem with the trend jackers, but they do have a problem with all the trolls that are there on Twitter. Right? Every time, if I'm a celebrity musician or like Lizzo, for example, and every time I post something, people are out there body shaming me, saying my music sucks and all of that. It is only a matter of time. So in general, the platform has a lot of work to do to try and promote healthy civic discourse. And the fact that it's able to entertain as much political, as much political interruption as it does right now, speaks to a much broader content governance issue that the platform has. They need to really think about what their positioning is, because that's what social media companies are about. They're very much about positioning and figuring out this is the conversation that we want to happen here. But I wonder whether that boat has sailed too far for them to reclaim it.
Right. I think if you take a step back then, sort of on that idea of civic discourse and looking at how, if you go back to the 2017 general election in Kenya, there was no TikTok, right?
Big moment,
exactly, right? So ByteDance and generally even Musically, the company that was bought and later became TikTok as we know it, they might have been around, but it was a very different
probably zero
ecosystem.
users in Kenya,
Right. No, I mean, thankfully, at least Nendo's trend report had a little something on them, and it's why we've always been able to chat to them because we were quite early in discussing them and their impact before they rose up. Now, it's been one of the fastest growing apps in Kenya, according to one of our previous trend reports. And you've just come out with some work looking into how that ecosystem handles content, which first of all has to be video, has to be vertical, has to be short. So there's some pre-existing conditions that are there, but there's also an entirely different algorithm. So what I typically say with TikTok is, if I open a Twitter account today, brand new Twitter account, with the most respect, I don't expect to be like the centerpiece of Twitter. And you could argue I could be on there for years and still keep 10 followers or less, right? Same for Instagram. Like maybe it's my lucky day, lucky stars, the algorithm smiles on me. But even then, you're rarely to make the explore page, much less anything else. Facebook speaks for itself. So generally between the meta platforms, Twitter, or just generally in terms of alternatives, there's not much. But TikTok, you could start today, put out one video in this studio, and the algorithm smiles on you. It's your time to shine. And so the whole nation is essentially seeing you. And that, for me, to give them both a compliment and then challenge you based on some findings you've just done, I think they have the most egalitarian algorithm. What I mean by that is I've seen the most diversity of Kenya, meaning I've seen Kenyans of various ethnic communities, complexions, colors, backgrounds. I've seen more rural Kenyans on there than I have anywhere else. By rural, we're talking about wherever they are, it looks like the middle of nowhere. We just did
Shembeteng started on TikTok.
Shembeteng started on TikTok, right? A whole new subculture within Sheng. So the power of that for me is that it's the algorithm. But is there a darker side or a side that's a bit more challenging? And what did you uncover in the work you did there?
I want you to think about it just from that same perspective. You see, all the nice things you've said about the platform. Now imagine if I'm the one who's, if I'm a politician looking to seed my narratives to a populace. Those same rules that apply to that teenager in his bedroom doing dance challenges, trying to get famous, also apply to political forces.
Right.
And the issue is that, TikTok have positioned themselves as an entertainment application. But what they don't realize is that, number one, we are Kenyans. And Kenyans love politics. And that any social media platform, surprisingly though, Instagram has managed to avoid it pretty much. But I think that's maybe it could be debated. But the platform has clearly lent itself to political leanings. Okay? In the sense that there are Kenyans who are consuming a lot of political content on the platform. The hashtags Kenya Kwanza and Azimio together have almost 100 million views on the platform.
And this isn't trend jacking, just to be clear.
This is not trend jacking. This is all organic content.
Right.
From what I can tell.
Right.
Okay? That means there's a lot of people engaging with politics on the platform. And what that means is that there has to be a reckoning to be able to address the fact that politics is happening on the platform. Don't ignore it. Now, the issue is that, we did this research because when we were going through our research on Twitter, we kept finding TikTok videos doing the rounds in the disinformation ecosystems on Twitter. So we were like, I wonder what would happen if we started going down the rabbit hole on this platform, right?
Right.
And that's when we found a whole bunch of very interesting pieces of content. Now, 4 million views, we basically found, hundreds of videos that in total had accumulated close to 4 million views on the platform. Now, 4 million views are hardly anything to make anyone panic, especially when it comes to the scale of social media platforms. But the main thing was that it raised a lot of areas for concern and potential pitfalls for the platform, because TikTok is always going to have a very hard time defending itself against weird things that people find on the platform, because the primary way of interaction is what?
What, the For You page?
Exactly.
Right.
Which is a recommendation engine.
I see. The algorithm we're talking about in the first place, right?
That means that's not out of your own volition. It's TikTok that's giving you that information.
Right.
So TikTok, in essence, was distributing very polarizing material that perhaps is problematic, sometimes breaks the law, sometimes doesn't, right? To millions of Kenyans. And that's just what we found, because also it's incredibly hard to research the platform. There's no analytics tools that necessarily have the ability to allow you to sift through the noise on all the platform. So that's based off of what we were able to find. It took an incredible amount of labor to find, assess, code, and categorize those videos into areas where we could actually go ahead and analyze the content. But, the main premise is this, that look, that same attraction that TikTok has to the wider general population, please consider who that wider general population is, because it's not just teenagers looking to get famous.
That's right.
It's also very many people looking to seed messages.
For sure. And I mean, I think that people sometimes get wrong, and I'll challenge you a bit on something you said earlier, because I am not fully sold on Kenya's digital journey. And I say this as somebody who runs, like organizations, campaigns, and work that's very heavily online. But the question I would sort of have us take a step back and think of is, for TikTok, for Twitter, for the Meta platforms, like we've seemingly discussed, and the Kenyan election, one thing I'd like you to spotlight just briefly, then we'll come to, can you win an election digitally, or how do digital native political figures act, is tell me a bit about what you call the minimum election standards and how those might be used or applied or recommended here. Because often what I find is one of the challenges is we talk, I think you deliver some pretty impactful investigative work that really shakes tables and starts a conversation. But aside from what I'd call the negative PR, which is one of the harshest ways to drive a lot of this criticism, there's typically a question of what next, right? And that can be deflected or pointed to as far as moderation. There's many sort of solutions that are there, but with us, with essentially, this massive upcoming day for Kenya on August 9th with the election, what are sort of the standards that would be, what's sort of at least a working frame that can be either imposed or expressed or recommended? And what would that mean if people are watching this and they're trying to stop, reflect, verify, they're trying to be better at actually not spreading and unwittingly taking part in misinformation? So what does that look like at maybe a 30,000-foot level from your view?
So the main point around the minimum election standards is that we've learned that first of all, social media is a new animal, right? Specifically big tech platforms. This is a word that is fairly new, and so very many people do not know how to deal with it or handle it at a government level. And so we're realizing that because this industry is so nascent, there are some basic needs that most industries actually have that have never been applied to this industry.
Right.
One is transparency, right? Banks actually, for example, a lot of the guys who are trying to get social media platforms to think about, what transparency means, because they're very much against it. They don't realize that there are people who are much more, perhaps sometimes more powerful than them, that actually have a lot of transparency requirements that they have to meet, right? Banks, for example, are one very good industry where you can actually see that there has been an effort to make sure that there is transparency within the industry and a certain set of minimum standards, because if they continue messing up, because there's a tendency for the industry to go rogue, it's going to mess up the whole society. And that's the same thing, right? That platforms need to be transparent. And what we mean by transparency is, can they share data with external researchers? Right? Can they make it very clear what their policies and guidelines, both to moderators and internally and externally, what are those gonna be? Because I know they'll come back and say, for security reasons, blah, 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 people can try and find ways to evade our whatever. But look, guys, I think it's doing a lot more harm than good, because too many of your own content moderators are not spotting things in time and when they should. And that's a big problem, even with platforms like TikTok, that number one, you can't go to your community guidelines and just say, we don't want hate speech on our platforms. Okay? That is not going to help a content moderator identify what hate speech is. Hate speech has dimensions. It has angles. It has context. There's things like dog whistling that you need to be able to identify.
Correct.
And if you don't tell this guy that, if you tell him that this is the only phrase you're supposed to be looking for, he's not going to take the content down. Before you know it, the video has over 1 million views. Yeah. And it causes problems, because even 200 people watching a hateful piece of content is a problem. Right? And you see it a lot in the US in the investigations when someone does a mass shooting, right? And they start snooping around on the guy's profile, and they find that the guy has been on a whole trove of, very hateful content. Who do you think is watching that hateful content? When we get view counts every time on each, that's one thing. So transparency. Second thing is collaboration. Yeah. So you're a global company. And these platforms are built in your own civic context, built by your people, not ours, and you're the ones that are exporting this to the world in a bid to make money, not because you're here to help us. A very important thing. Social media companies, big tech companies are not here to help us, they're here to make money. Okay? So as you move around the world with your policies and everything, please engage local stakeholders. Don't assume you know. Just make the effort. It's expensive, yes, but do it. Okay? Because if you fail to do so, you are actually going to end up in the pitfalls of point number one. Right? Because you lack the local context, and therefore context bias rears its ugly head, and you end up in a case whereby you're deleting a president's tweet, and your platform ends up getting banned for an entire year. You're not understanding the local context of what is going on.
Is that what happened in Nigeria?
Exactly.
Correct.
And, it's on the record that, these guys tried to reach out to Twitter to get them to fix this situation. Twitter did not respond, and boom. Wow. Your platform is banned for 7 months.
Right.
So context is very important. So that's where a majority of them come in. And also, I think the third bit is just, the platforms need to give a damn. They should really start by, making an effort. And it's nice to see that, the platforms have been hanging around, Nairobi and, since the beginning of the year, seeing platforms coming, having meetings with people. I hope they don't stop at meetings. That's the big question.
Correct.
I hope they don't stop at meetings. I would wonder what the monitoring systems are currently saying about what people are feeding on, but I hope it doesn't stop. I hope it just doesn't stop at, paying lip service to various people within the city. So let's see if all this effort is actually going to pan out, especially in the next coming 3 weeks, where the information ecosystem is going to get 10 times more polluted than we already think it is.
It's going to hit peak sort of pre-election and during election and post-election period.
Exactly.
With the election and the pre-election, so the week before, the day of, the week after, the days and weeks after, what would you advise for those people? And let's split them into two. One, those who want to do a bit more investigation. They want to actually try to be a bit more judicious and go down the rabbit hole to see if something is true. And then lastly, for just everyone, some very basic rules of thumb that you recommend to the people in your life who are not as tech savvy. So let's start with those who actually want to do a bit of the work you do. They can't necessarily, but what are those fingertip things you're just recommending people start with?
Yeah, one of the things I think, fact checkers don't like me very much, because I've always said that information pollution is not something that you can fact check away, to be honest, because it goes way beyond even just the simple use of false information, right? goes beyond the use of, it goes into the use of weaponized information, recontextualized information, a mix of true and false information. And so in general, the main thing that needs to work here is accountability and institution building. That's how we deal with the issues that we have. What we have is actually a democratic and political problem. It's not just a true or false problem. Yeah. And that requires institution building. It requires accountability work. So you have to go back to your first principles of journalism, which is that journalism is about holding power to account. And that's where your work is supposed to go. For those who are really trying to trying to do some of the stuff that I do, the answer is right there. This is accountability work. This is institutional work. And so you need to investigate this as you would investigate any normal story. It cannot stop at simply saying that this is true or false. Someone is behind this information. There's a way this information spread. There's someone who has a motive for this information to spread. Right? In some cases in the US, they found out there was a whole bunch of teenagers in Macedonia who learned they could make money.
That's right.
Of spreading fake news. Right? You would have thought it was the Russians or anything like that, but you understand.
Right.
Journalism, for those who, maybe if there's a journalist who's interested in doing this kind of thing, or maybe anybody else, it's that this story has a very big value chain that can be investigated, and that a lot of it actually points to a lot of the political upheaval and democratic upheaval that we have in the country. That's what information pollution is about. Yeah, it's not a binary thing.
Okay. In terms of what we're doing at StopReflectVerify.com, so a misinformation quiz, trying to basically move from the fact check towards some slight behavior change, right, wrong, some moment of contemplation, a final score, and this idea, I want a benchmark, right? I got, like 5 out of 6. I want to see if Madu's going to get a 6 out of 6 or a 3 out of 6, right? What do you think about what Stop, Reflect, Verify is doing? And also, in your view, for the everyday person, what is some of that bread and butter, very simple rules of thumb that you can recommend to them and speak to?
Okay, so I used to be because of accountability work, right? So I used to be anti-media literacy until I realized I need to get media literate myself.
Well, there you go.
So I've fallen for a lot of... You have to fall for these things. I think that's the point at which you begin to also care about the stuff that you consume. So I found myself sharing quite a bit of fake, false information. I've found myself consuming a lot of false information and believing it. I mean, I started doing... The reason I think I'm actually so good at this work is because I'm an avid conspiracy theorist. I watch a lot of conspiracy theories. So I know where the depth of this... If I want to find a weird piece of information, I know how deep the corners of the internet that I can find this information. So it's very important. I've come to understand, especially working around looking into extremist networks and understanding extremist ideologies. Education is actually a big part of intervention. And so things like Stop, Reflect, Verify, if they can go as far as possible, because the issue is again, the feeling of, having believed a piece of information and then finding out it was false, like you truly believed it and you found out it was false. That actually is not a nice feeling. I don't think it is. And that's why most people, it's such a bad feeling. That's why most people hold on, you get?
Right. To the
misinformation, despite it being debunked. Right? Because it attacks your identity. So you guys actually have a very tough...
Tell me about it.
Yeah, you have a very tough job to do. And so I think this is one attempt at education that I think is very interesting in terms of gamification. And I'd love to see what it can evolve to, because the education needs to be there. But it also needs to be a very value-based conversation.
Right.
Because there are so many angles to how people fall for things and make decisions based off of false information. It needs to, like, there's a very real need for facts, to be honest. Also, there's a very real need for facts, because too much of our lives depends on information. So I definitely commend what you guys are doing as SRV, and I'd love to see it evolve, because, yeah, people need to know whether the image of a political rally they're seeing has actual crowds. Because, you see, that's a thing that's happening.
Right.
Yeah, does it have actual crowds, or does it, or is it photoshopped? That sex scandal of a certain politician, is that really him, or is that, like, it matters.
Right.
If you want to really be an engaged citizen and not a sycophant, you actually want to know what is going on. So even if that small sliver of engaged citizens can learn, I think I would advise, because I think it's becoming a basic tool set of that some certain elements of media literacy need to be basic education. Like, it needs to be part of, like, even when you go to school, like, that's what I mean. Like, when you go to school, they need to teach you phone etiquette and technology etiquette. Like, if you receive a piece of information, this is how to check whether it's false. If it's a video, you can check for the information on this. Like, people need to learn how to navigate this information environment at a very early age.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, this problem will keep perpetuating itself. Then from there, we can now start dealing with the other bigger issues of partisanship and values and the rest of that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's our show. So I want to appreciate you, Madhu, for coming through. And just to say, if you're listening or watching or just interacting with snippets of this, you might want to keep up with the full series of multiple podcast episodes available both in video and in audio, and then in snippets and little sound bites shared across the web. And so this is the Stop, Reflect, Verify podcast based on the stopreflectverify.com misinformation quiz. And hopefully you've ended up being a little smarter, a little wiser, and found better ways for you as you scroll with your thumbs, with your index, wherever you are on the internet, that you'll find ways to keep up and keep smart. Because as we've heard and as will be expected, the election pre, during, and post period will need you to be vigilant. And even beyond that, just generally to be an active and engaged citizen, no matter where you are in the world. Thank you for listening, for watching, for being here. And until next time.